The lecture hall on Centauri Prime was completely quiet. Professor Velthanis pressed a button and a bright holographic display appeared in the air. Alien students from many different worlds sat in their chairs. Some had tentacles that moved nervously. Others had mandibles that clicked softly. All of them looked curious and excited. Words appeared in the floating display: Classification Level Omega, Human Prohibition Protocols. Professor Velthanis had a voice that sounded like crystal bells ringing. She spoke clearly so everyone could hear. Today we will learn about something very important. We will discover why one species is not allowed to fight in any galactic wars. This species is called humans. They come from a planet called Earth. A student from Rigel raised his hand. His eyes were on long stalks that could move in different directions. Right now they turned toward the professor in a way that showed he did not think much of humans. Professor, those humans are just primitive creatures that walk on two legs. What danger could they possibly be to anyone? Professor Velthanis touched her electronic tablet. Suddenly a beautiful image appeared in the air. It showed a small blue and green planet floating in the darkness of space. A yellow star shone nearby. 200 years ago, we all thought exactly like you do now, she said to her students. The humans seemed to have poor technology. Their planet had many different countries that often fought with each other. Physically they looked ordinary and not very strong. When the Galactic Council first met them, we offered them membership as a very small and unimportant civilization. The professor stopped talking and looked carefully at all the young alien faces in front of her. Some students had fur. Others had scales. A few were made of what looked like living crystal. But they all showed the same expression of interest mixed with doubt. What happened after that first meeting changed everything we thought we knew about warfare, she continued. The hologram changed to show new pictures. Now there were detailed maps of star systems and formations of spaceships arranged for battle. There was a species called the Vexcari swarm. They were incredibly dangerous. In just 20 years they had conquered 17 complete sectors of space. Billions of creatures lived in those sectors before the Vexcari came. After the Vexcari left, most of those worlds were empty. A student who looked like a large dolphin but could breathe air spoke through a translation machine around her neck. What did the Vexcari have to do with the humans? The Vexcari decided to test the humans, Professor Velthanis explained. They wanted to see if these new creatures were worthy of being in the galaxy. So they sent their entire war fleet to human space. 100,000 Vexcari warships flew toward Earth and the other human colonies. The hologram now showed the size difference between the two fleets. The Vexcari ships were huge and looked like giant insects made of metal and living tissue. They moved through space like a dark cloud that covered everything. In comparison, the human fleet looked tiny and weak. How many ships did the humans have? Asked a student whose body was made of flowing gas held together in a clear container. Only 3,000 vessels, the professor answered. The Vexcari had more than 30 ships for every human ship. Their weapons were more advanced. Their ships were bigger and stronger. Every species in the galaxy expected the same thing to happen that had happened to 17 other sectors. The cetacean student spoke again through her translator. Surely the humans were completely destroyed. How could such a small fleet survive against such overwhelming numbers? Professor Velthanis smiled, but it was not a happy smile. It was the kind of smile someone makes when they remember something that still frightens them. No, the humans were not destroyed. They won the war. But the truly terrifying thing was not that they won. The terrifying thing was how fast they learned to win. The hologram changed to show the first battle between humans and Vexcari. The human ships moved in patterns that seemed strange and random at first. They did not attack directly like most species would. Instead, they seemed to be studying their enemies. The first human ship to encounter the Vexcari was commanded by Captain Kim Jisoo. When 50 Vexcari warships surrounded her single vessel, she did not try to fight them immediately. She did not call for help. She did not try to run away. Instead, she sent them a message. The professor touched her tablet again. The voice of Captain Kim Jisoo filled the lecture hall. It was calm and steady even though she was facing certain death. We do not want war with you. But if you force us to fight, we will learn how to fight you better than you fight yourselves. At first, the Vexcari commanders thought this was just empty boasting from a creature about to die, Professor Velthanis continued. They had heard similar threats from dozens of species before destroying them. But Captain Kim Jisoo was not boasting. She was making a promise. The hologram showed what happened next. The human ship began moving in complex patterns around the Vexcari vessels. Every time the aliens fired their weapons, the human ship barely escaped. But with each narrow escape, the human ship seemed to move with more confidence and precision. Within 6 hours, Captain Kim Jisoo had identified 17 critical weaknesses in Vex-carry ship design and battle tactics. She transmitted this information to every other human ship in the fleet. By the end of the first day, human vessels were no longer just surviving encounters with the Vex-carry. They were winning them. The alien students sat in stunned silence as they watched the battle recordings. What had started as a hopeless fight for survival had become something completely different. The humans were not just defending themselves anymore. They were learning. The holographic display flickered and changed to show old recordings from many years ago. The alien students leaned forward in their seats to get a better look. On the screen they could see a large round chamber with a high ceiling. This was the famous Galactic Council meeting hall where representatives from hundreds of different worlds came to make important decisions. In the center of the great hall stood a human. He looked very small compared to all the aliens around him. Some of the alien delegates were 3 times taller than the human. Others had multiple arms or heads. A few floated in the air instead of standing on legs. The human looked ordinary and plain next to all these impressive creatures. "This is Ambassador Lee Miho from Earth," Professor Velthanis told her students. "He was the first human to ever speak to the Galactic Council. Watch how he behaves." The students could see Ambassador Lee Miho bowing politely to the alien delegates. His voice was quiet and respectful when he spoke. He did not demand anything or make threats. He simply asked for help with basic things his people needed. Human Ambassador Lee Miho requested only simple medical supplies and farming technology, Professor Velthanis explained to her class. He did not ask for powerful weapons. He did not want military advisors to teach his people how to fight wars. He did not request advanced spaceships or energy shields. The Galactic Council found him disappointingly humble and modest. A student who had 3 fingers on each hand raised one hand high in the air. "Professor, what made the council change their opinion about humans? They seemed so peaceful and harmless." The scene on the holographic display suddenly changed dramatically. Now the students could see deep space, far away from any planets or stars. The area looked empty and dark. Then suddenly huge tiers opened in the fabric of space itself. These were hyperspace portals that allowed ships to travel vast distances instantly. From these glowing portals emerged the most terrifying sight in the known galaxy. Massive ships that looked like they were made from the bodies of giant insects came pouring out. These vessels were not built from metal and circuits like normal spaceships. Instead, they appeared to be grown from living tissue and bone. They had wings that flapped slowly in the vacuum of space. Their hulls pulsed like beating hearts. Rows of eyes dotted their surfaces, searching for enemies. "These are the ships of the Vex-carry swarm," Professor Velthanis said in a serious voice. "They were the most feared military force in galactic history. For hundreds of years, no one had been able to stop them when they decided to attack." The bioorganic ships moved through space with a grace that was both beautiful and terrifying. They flowed like a school of predatory fish, working together with perfect coordination. Their destination was clear from the star charts shown on the display. They were heading directly toward Earth's solar system. "The Vex-carry chose humanity for what they called their ritual of dominance," the professor continued. "This was a test they performed on new species. They would attack with overwhelming force and expect total victory within 72 hours. Any species that could not defend itself was considered unworthy of existence." The hologram zoomed in to show one particular area of space near Earth. A single human warship hung motionless among the stars. It was called the Soul's Pride, and it was much smaller than the approaching Vex-carry vessels. The human ship looked fragile and weak compared to the massive bioships that were closing in on it. The Soul's Pride was commanded by Captain Kim Jisoo, Professor Velthanis told her students. She was about to have the most important encounter in human history, though she did not know it at the time. 3 of the largest Vex-carry bioships surrounded the lone human vessel. Each alien ship was at least 10 times bigger than the Soul's Pride. They had weapons that could destroy entire cities with a single blast. Their living hulls were protected by armor that had never been penetrated by any known weapon. The students expected to see the human ship immediately start firing its weapons or try to escape at maximum speed. Instead, something completely unexpected happened. The Soul's Pride simply floated in space and sent a message to the Vex-carry ships. Captain Kim Jisoo spoke directly to the Vex-carry fleet commander, Professor Velthanis explained. The captain's voice came through the speakers in the lecture hall. It was calm and steady, showing no fear even though she was facing certain death. "We do not want war with you. But if you force us to fight, we will learn how to fight you better than you fight yourselves." The alien students looked puzzled. This seemed like a strange thing to say when facing such overwhelming odds. How could the humans possibly fight better than the Vexcari, who had been perfecting warfare for centuries? What happened next amazed everyone watching. The human ship began to move in complex patterns around the much larger Vexcari vessels. It was like watching an elaborate dance performed in the darkness of space. The Soul's Pride weaved between the alien ships, sometimes coming so close that it almost touched their living hulls. Every time the Vexcari fired their terrible weapons, the human ship barely managed to dodge the attack. But the students noticed something interesting. With each narrow escape, the human ship seemed to move with more confidence and precision. It was as if Captain Kim Jisoo was learning something important from every attack. This was not random movement, Professor Velthanis pointed out. Every maneuver was carefully calculated. Captain Kim Jisoo was studying her enemies, learning from each attack pattern they used. The hologram showed data streams flowing between the Soul's Pride and other human ships scattered throughout the solar system. Captain Kim Jisoo was sharing everything she learned in real time with the rest of the human fleet. Within 6 hours, Captain Kim Jisoo had identified 17 critical weaknesses in Vexcari bioship design, the professor continued. She did not just survive the encounter. She began teaching other human ships exactly how to exploit these weaknesses. More human vessels began arriving at the battle site. Each new ship that joined the fight moved with increasing skill and sophistication. What had started as desperate attempts to avoid being destroyed quickly evolved into precise, surgical attacks on Vexcari weak points. The Vexcari commander, Highspawn Zerthak, sent a message that was recorded by both sides. His voice carried fear for the first time in his long military career. These creatures learn too fast. They adapt like a virus spreading through our defenses. He was absolutely right. The lights in the lecture hall slowly grew dimmer until the room was almost completely dark. Professor Velthanis touched several buttons on her control panel with great care. Her crystalline fingers moved precisely as she accessed the most secret files in the Galactic Military Database. What I am about to show you has never been seen by anyone outside this academy, she said in a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the silent room. These are the classified records of the siege of Thermopylae Station. This battle was when humanity truly became a galactic power, though the rest of the galaxy tried very hard to forget it ever happened. A new hologram appeared in the center of the room. It showed a massive space station floating in orbit around a giant planet made of swirling gases. The station looked impressive at first glance. It had rotating sections that created artificial gravity for the people living inside. Solar panels stretched out like wings to collect energy from the distant sun. Docking bays could hold dozens of ships. "This looks like an ordinary military outpost," said a student whose skin was covered in green scales. Professor Velthanis touched her controls again. Suddenly the view pulled back to show the true scale of what they were looking at. The space station, which had seemed so large a moment before, now appeared tiny and insignificant. Surrounding it in every direction were thousands upon thousands of Vexcari bioships. They formed a sphere of living metal and flesh that completely enclosed the human station. 10,000 Vexcari vessels surrounded a single human outpost, Professor Velthanis explained. The number was so large that many students had trouble imagining it. The bioships were arranged in perfect formation. There was no way for anyone to escape. No way for supplies or reinforcements to reach the humans trapped inside. The display zoomed in to show the nameplate on the space station. Thermopylae Station, Earth Colonial Defense Force. Below that, smaller text listed the commanding officer, Station Commander Lee Dae-hoon. Commander Lee Dae-hoon had only 500 people under his command, the professor continued. These included soldiers, technicians, medical staff, and civilian researchers. They had enough food and air to last perhaps 2 months if they were very careful. A student who looked like a large reptile made a hissing sound that expressed disbelief. "Professor, this is impossible. No military force in galactic history has ever survived such overwhelming odds. 500 people against 10,000 warships? They must have been destroyed within hours." Professor Velthanis smiled that same frightening smile her students had seen before. Survive? Commander Lee and his people did much more than just survive. She pressed another button and the display zoomed in even closer to show the space station in great detail. Through the transparent windows they could see humans moving around inside. But these people were not acting like soldiers preparing to die. They were working calmly at computer terminals, studying data, and having organized meetings. Commander Lee Dae-hoon and his second-in-command, Lieutenant Colonel Park Hae-in, made a decision that changed everything, Professor Velthanis explained. They decided not to think of the siege as a battle they needed to win. Instead, they treated it as the greatest learning opportunity in human history. The hologram showed recordings from inside the space station. Human soldiers were preparing for what looked like suicide missions. Small ships launched from the station's docking bays and flew directly toward the massive Vexcari fleet. The alien students expected to see these tiny vessels destroyed immediately. But something strange happened. The human ships did not try to inflict maximum damage on their enemies. Instead, they seemed to be conducting careful experiments. They would attack one specific part of a Vexcari bioship, record the results, then retreat quickly before they could be destroyed. Every attack the humans made was designed to learn something new, Professor Velthanis explained. They discovered how Vexcari ships communicated with each other. They studied the aliens' response times under different kinds of stress. They mapped out the command structure of the entire enemy fleet. The display showed conversations between the human defenders. The students expected to hear desperate plans for escape or final messages to loved ones. Instead, they heard something completely different. "We need 3 more data points on their communication frequency rotation," one human officer was saying to another. "Dr. Choi Jiho believes we can predict their tactical responses with 97% accuracy if we can just test 2 more scenarios." Dr. Choi Jiho appeared on the screen. She was a small woman with quick, intelligent eyes who worked as the station's expert on alien life forms. She had turned her laboratory into a center for studying Vexcari psychology and behavior patterns. Dr. Choi Jiho began analyzing how the Vexcari fought with frightening precision, Professor Velthanis continued. She studied every piece of data the station's defenders collected. She learned to predict exactly how the enemy would react to different types of attacks. By the 3rd month of the siege, something remarkable had happened. The humans were no longer fighting like desperate defenders trying to stay alive. They had become hunters studying their prey. Captain Song Yuna led a series of raids that seemed impossible to understand at first. Her ships would attack specific Vexcari vessels, but not to destroy them. Instead, she targeted the command centers where the alien officers made their decisions. Captain Song was not trying to kill Vexcari commanders, the professor explained. She was studying how their hierarchy worked under pressure. She wanted to understand how fear and confusion spread through their command structure. The footage showed captured Vexcari officers being questioned by human interrogators. But these were not the brutal interrogations that most species used on their enemies. The humans asked careful questions designed to understand how Vexcari minds worked. The humans learned how to break Vexcari morale not through cruelty, but through precise psychological pressure, Professor Velthanis said. They discovered exactly which fears and doubts would cause Vexcari warriors to lose confidence in their leaders. By the 6th month of the siege, something unprecedented began to happen. Vexcari bioships started leaving their positions around the space station. At first it was just a few vessels. Then dozens. Then hundreds. The Vexcari fleet began experiencing mass desertions, the professor concluded. Warriors who had never shown fear in 1,000 battles were abandoning their posts. They preferred to face court-martial and execution rather than continue fighting against human defenders who had learned to predict their every move. The siege ended not with the humans' destruction, but with the Vexcari's retreat. For the first time in their history, the unstoppable swarm had been stopped. Professor Velthanis stopped the holographic display and looked carefully at each of her students. She could see many different emotions on their alien faces. Some students looked frightened by what they had just learned. Others seemed fascinated but confused. A few appeared to be having trouble believing what they had witnessed. The professor took a deep breath and pressed new buttons on her control panel. The siege of Thermopylae Station ended, but not in the way anyone expected. The humans won their defensive battle, but what happened next was far worse than their defeat would have been. New footage began playing in the center of the lecture hall. It showed human spaceships leaving the area around the gas giant where Thermopylae Station still orbited. But these ships were not returning home to celebrate their victory. Instead, they were following the retreating Vexcari fleet deeper into space. Admiral Kim Taeyong commanded the human pursuit fleet, Professor Velthanis explained. He made a decision that military strategists across the galaxy still have nightmares about. Instead of being satisfied with their defensive victory, the humans decided to follow their enemies all the way back to where they came from. The hologram showed star maps with dotted lines marking the path of both fleets. The Vexcari bioships were fleeing toward their home territory at maximum speed. The human vessels followed behind them like persistent hunters tracking wounded prey. This was unprecedented in galactic warfare, the professor continued. When most species win a defensive battle, they repair their damaged ships, treat their wounded, and strengthen their defenses in case the enemy returns. The humans did something completely different. They saw their victory as the beginning of a larger campaign, not the end of the conflict. The star map zoomed out to show an entire spiral galaxy spinning slowly in the darkness of space. This galaxy was different from the one where Earth and most other civilized worlds were located. It was filled with thousands of red and orange stars, and many of its planets glowed with an eerie bioluminescence. "This is the Vexcary home galaxy," Professor Velthani said. For over 2,000 years, it had been completely unconquerable. Billions of Vexcary lived on hundreds of different worlds. Natural barriers like asteroid fields and unstable wormholes protected the approaches to their territory. Defensive fleets that had never been defeated guarded every possible entry point. A student whose body was made of swirling gas contained in a transparent suit raised one of her appendages. Her vapor patterns shifted in a way that showed nervousness. "Professor, are you telling us that the humans actually invaded the Vexcary homeworld? How could such a small fleet penetrate defenses that had held for millennia?" Professor Velthani shook her head slowly. "No, the humans did not invade in the traditional sense. They did something much more clever and much more devastating than a direct military assault." The display changed to show detailed organizational charts and diagrams. These were not military formations or ship designs. Instead, they showed the complex social structure of Vexcary civilization. There were breeding castes, warrior classes, worker groups, and ruling hierarchies. Lines connected different groups, showing relationships of command, cooperation, and ancient rivalry. "Colonel Yoon Saiwan led a very special kind of infiltration operation," the professor explained. Using biotechnology captured during the siege, small teams of humans disguised themselves and inserted themselves directly into Vexcary society. They did not come as conquerors. They came as students. The students in the lecture hall looked confused. How could studying the enemy be more dangerous than attacking them? The humans spent months learning everything they could about how Vexcary civilization worked, Professor Velthanis continued. They studied the aliens' social customs, their ancient traditions, their political systems, and their cultural fears. Most importantly, they learned about the conflicts and tensions that already existed within Vexcary society. The hologram showed a human woman working at a computer terminal surrounded by massive amounts of data. Text scrolled across multiple screens faster than most beings could read. Charts and graphs displayed information about Vexcary psychology, sociology, and anthropology. Dr. Bei Seojin was a human expert on alien cultures, the professor said. She spent 8 months creating the most complete study of Vexcary society that had ever been done. She identified weak points in their caste system that could be exploited. She mapped out traditional rivalries between different broods that went back centuries. She discovered psychological triggers that could destabilize their entire civilization. The footage showed the results of Dr. Bei Seojin's research being put into action. Human agents, still disguised as various Vexcary castes, began appearing in different parts of the alien empire. They attended important meetings, participated in cultural ceremonies, and engaged in seemingly innocent conversations with Vexcary leaders. But these conversations were not innocent at all. Every word had been carefully chosen to create maximum psychological impact. The humans began whispering exactly the right words in exactly the right places, Professor Velthanis explained. They reminded old enemies of ancient grudges. They planted seeds of doubt about the loyalty of different castes. They suggested that certain broods were planning to betray others. The hologram showed the devastating results. Vexcary fleets that had been preparing to launch new attacks on other species suddenly turned their weapons on each other. Ancient alliances that had lasted for centuries crumbled within weeks. Different castes began fighting civil wars over perceived insults and imagined betrayals. The most feared military force in galactic history began tearing itself apart from within, the professor said quietly. And the humans never fired another shot. They simply provided the spark that ignited conflicts that had been waiting to explode for generations. The final image showed Major Han Kyungji's official report to Earth Command. Most of the document was classified, but one line was displayed for the students to read. Understanding your enemy completely means you no longer need to destroy them, you can make them destroy themselves. The lecture hall fell completely silent as the students absorbed the full implications of what they had learned. The humans had not just defeated the Vexcary. They had made the aliens defeat themselves. The lecture hall became completely quiet. Not a single student moved or made any sound. Even the soft humming of the ventilation systems seemed too loud in the heavy silence. Professor Velthani stood at her control panel and called up the most important and most secret document in galactic history. "What I am about to show you explains everything," she said in a voice so serious that several students felt afraid without knowing why. "This is why you are here in this academy. This is why this institution exists. And this is why humanity is banned from all galactic warfare." A new hologram appeared, larger and more detailed than any they had seen before. It showed the Great Council chamber where representatives from every major species in the galaxy came to make the most important decisions. But this was not a normal session. The chamber looked chaotic and frightening. Delegates from dozens of different worlds were arguing loudly with each other. Some were standing on tables, waving multiple arms in anger. Others had activated defensive shields around their seats. A few species had actually walked out of the session entirely, leaving empty spaces in the great circular arrangement. This emergency session lasted for 3 full weeks, Professor Velthani explained. It was called immediately after the Vexcari civilization collapsed. Every major power in the galaxy sent their most important leaders to participate. They all came to discuss the same terrifying question. She paused and looked at each of her students carefully before continuing. The question was simple but impossible to answer. What do you do when you discover a species that does not just win wars, but actually perfects the art of warfare itself? The hologram zoomed in to show one particular delegate speaking to the assembled crowd. He was tall and thin with silver skin that reflected the chamber's lights. Text appeared identifying him as Fleet Admiral Kexthul of the Zentorian Empire. Admiral Kexthul had fought in more battles than any other military leader in galactic history, the professor said. He had studied warfare for over 300 years. Listen to what he told the council. Admiral Kexthul's voice filled the lecture hall. Even through the translation systems, his words carried obvious fear and respect. The humans do not fight like conquerors who want to take territory. They do not fight like defenders who want to protect their homes. They fight like scientists conducting a laboratory experiment. Every single battle teaches them something new. Every conflict makes them better at the fundamental nature of war itself. More voices began speaking from the hologram. Representative after representative from different species stood up to share their own observations about human military capabilities. All of them had reached the same frightening conclusion. A delegate who looked like a giant insect with crystal wings spoke next. Our intelligence services have analyzed human tactical databases. They contain detailed behavioral studies of every species they have ever encountered. Not just information about weapons and ship designs, but complete psychological profiles, cultural weakness assessments, and social structures that could be exploited during conflicts. A student made of living crystal began vibrating in a way that created musical tones. This was how her species expressed nervousness. "Professor, are you saying the humans were planning to conquer the entire galaxy? Were they preparing to attack all of us?" Professor Velthani shook her head firmly. "No. That is exactly what made them so terrifying. The humans showed absolutely no interest in conquest or domination." The hologram changed to show official reports filed by human military officers after their victory over the Vexcari. The students expected to see plans for further attacks or demands for tribute from defeated enemies. Instead, they saw something completely unexpected. Captain No Minjae had written a detailed report recommending peaceful contact with 17 different species that the humans had learned about during their conflict with the Vexcari. The document contained carefully planned proposals for trade agreements that would benefit both humans and the alien civilizations. There were suggestions for cultural exchange programs, joint scientific research projects, and mutual defense pacts. The humans had just defeated the most feared military force in known space, Professor Velthani said slowly. They had proven they could destroy any enemy through pure strategic superiority. And their first instinct was to offer friendship and cooperation to everyone else in the galaxy. The hologram displayed more human diplomatic communications. Every message was generous, respectful, and focused on creating mutual prosperity. The humans offered to share their medical technology, their agricultural techniques, and their educational systems. They asked for nothing in return except peaceful coexistence. "Do you understand now?" Professor Velthani asked her students. The humans had become the ultimate predators of galactic warfare, and they did not even realize it themselves. They thought they were just defending their homes and making new friends. She activated the final and most important document. The official seal of the Galactic Council appeared, followed by text written in dozens of different languages. At the top, in large letters, were the words, "Human Prohibition Protocols Classification Level Omega." This ban was created not because humans are violent or aggressive, the professor explained. It exists because they are too good at learning, adapting, and mastering warfare. Every single conflict they participate in makes them exponentially more dangerous in the next conflict. The document showed detailed analysis of human learning patterns during their brief war with the Vex carry. Charts and graphs demonstrated how quickly human tactical abilities had improved. The rate of adaptation was unlike anything ever recorded in galactic military history. The Council realized that if humans continued to participate in conflicts, they would eventually become so skilled at warfare that no force in the universe could oppose them, Professor Velthanis continued. Not through superior technology or greater numbers, but through pure strategic and tactical perfection. The final section of the document contained the most chilling assessment of all. It was signed by representatives from every major civilization in the galaxy. Humanity must never be allowed to discover the true extent of their military capabilities. They must never realize that they have become the apex predators of galactic warfare. For if they ever turn their full analytical abilities toward the goal of conquest, no civilization in existence would be able to stop them. The hologram disappeared, leaving the students in darkness with only emergency lighting. Professor Velthani stood quietly for a long moment before speaking her final words. Today humans serve as traders, explorers, and peacekeepers throughout the galaxy. They believe the prohibition exists to protect others from human aggression. They have no idea that it actually exists to protect them from accidentally discovering that they are already the most dangerous military force the universe has ever seen. The lecture hall remained silent as the students absorbed this terrible truth. Humanity had been made powerful beyond measure, and the greatest mercy was that they did not know it.